Hi, and thank you so much for returning to the Dare to Share channel. This is Sonia, and we are continuing along in the works of Dr. Myles Munroe, Overcoming Crisis, Secrets to Thriving in Challenging Times. Stay tuned. Chapter 1, Global Crisis, Personal Crisis. Seeds of faith are always within us. Sometimes it takes a crisis to nourish and encourage their growth. Susan Taylor.
What constitutes a crisis? How bad does a situation have to be? What kind of crisis have you been through in your life? What kind of crisis are you in right now? It is true that what can seem like a crisis to one person is not a crisis to someone else. Yet for everyone, a crisis is an event over which one has no control. Crises are experiences that you did not anticipate or prepare for. They take you by surprise and they fill you with anxiety. Let's say the weather forecast says that a hurricane is coming. Here in the Bahamas, we know that could be serious. We know that when hurricanes hit, they don't mess around. Suddenly, your priorities are different. If you were planning to go visit your friend, you change your plan. If you have a family, you try to make sure they will be safe. You do whatever you have to do to get ready for the storm before it hits your neighborhood. Or say the doctor says, you've got 3 weeks to live if you don't change your habits. He's not joking. All of a sudden you get motivated to change. This is a crisis. You may not be able to avoid all of the consequences of your eating habits, your smoking, or whatever, but you will probably clean up your act. You will stop eating cheesecake and macaroni salad on the same plate, and you will start eating raw carrots. You may have been trying to stop smoking for 50 years without success, but now, instantly, you will stop cold turkey. A crisis forces the issue. You cannot control the crisis that has come upon you, but you can begin to control some of the details of your predicament. You can make some headway against it. Later on, you may even be able to appreciate the crisis for forcing you to change. One thing I like about hurricanes is that they clean things up. All the rotten trees, the poor construction, the junk lying around, the hurricane comes through and creates a mess. But 5 months later, the mess has been cleaned up and you see a cleaned up landscape, new flowers, new buildings. Effects of a crisis. Jesus said that we will always have troubles. See John 16:33. One crisis after another will come our way as long as we live, regardless of how well insulated we try to make ourselves. So it is important to get a grip on how to overcome not only some of the circumstances, but also, especially, our emotional responses to difficulties. If we can regain our emotional footing in a storm, we will be able to overcome. First, before we can regain our emotional footing, we need to put our feet on the rock solid foundation of God. To regain your emotional footing or stand secure on God, the rock solid foundation, a crisis produces some or all of the following emotional responses in us: fear, trauma, depression, despair, frustration, anxiety, loneliness, worry, hopelessness. We can be consumed by any of the following states of mind: a sense of abandonment, a sense of loss, a sense of death, an urgency for survival. Being fearful makes people respond in a knee-jerk fashion to a crisis, and they may set up a cycle of negative consequences, such as the following: abuse, physical, psychological, verbal, crime, domestic violence, or even substance abuse. These reactions set people up for further crisis. You probably know what I mean from experience. The experts cannot help. This fast-spreading economic disease called recession may be causing many of our personal crises or adding to the crisis we already have. Some commentators early in the financial crisis of the fall of 2008 began to use the more frightening word depression. Very often, an economic depression causes personal depression. One crisis piles on top of another. The systems of the world's kingdoms are collapsing. The world is filled with fear. Powerful people are wringing their hands. The leaders do not know what to do. They are, as I heard Mr. Gordon Brown, the Prime Minister of Great Britain and an economic specialist, say, experimenting. A lot of decisions are being based on theories rather than experience. We do not know yet if the experiments will work. Nobody has faced this exact kind of a crisis situation before. The world economic system is spinning out of control. Powerful people are powerless to stop the breakdown. The relatively manageable problems of the recent past now make those times look like the good old days. Now it is too late to go back to them. The blame game. The prevailing tendency is to blame somebody or something. Whose fault is it? Let's go get 'em. But that does not help, does it? Anyway, there's really no one person or event to blame. When you get laid off from your job, you want to blame the management or the company. You want to counterattack and hold someone responsible for your dilemma. I tell you, do not waste your energy on that, especially these days. The whole world is in a crisis, and you just happen to have gotten knocked off your horse too. When the United States Congress asked a spokesman for the Federal Reserve what caused this meltdown, his answer contained a very biblical word, greed. He said that when the people in charge become greedy, they plant the seeds for the collapse of the very economic system they think they can use to their advantage. What is greed? Greed is the mismanagement of resources for personal benefit, coupled with a disregard for the benefits of others. Greed is when you want more than you need at the expense of everybody else. Greed means I know I need only one pillow, but I want 10. I need only one little plate full of food at a time, but I want the whole restaurant. Greedy people don't care who gets hurt. They just go after whatever they want and don't concern themselves with other people. They see an opportunity to acquire more money, greater status, or further pleasures, and they charge ahead in pursuit of their selfish goals, regardless of how many people they have to trample on in the process. Right now, people in the United States are losing their homes by the thousands. Foreclosure is taking about 3,000 homes a week away from families who usually have no other place to go. Some of them will end up living in their cars. At this writing, it is estimated that by the end of 2009, over 2 million homes will have been lost. Just a handful of greedy people have caused a tidal wave of grief for others. Greed walks hand in hand with partners such as malice, deceit, theft, envy, evil thoughts, lewdness, adultery, slander, arrogance, murder, and all kinds of folly. See Mark 7:21 through 22. The reason these evils travel together is because all of them originate in the sinful hearts of human beings. In many ways, they represent aspects of greed. Theft is greed for things that are perceived as valuable to the thief. Envy and slander represent a greed for reputation. Lewdness and adultery are forms of sexual greed. Arrogance and murder amount to greed for power and vengeance. In this parable about the rich but foolish farmer, Jesus gave us his advice about avoiding greed. Then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich toward God." Luke 12:15-21. Watch your heart.
All right, you might say, so we can blame the economic mess on the greed of the fat cats in high places. What good does that do me as I stand in the unemployment line? For one thing, it can be a caution to you. Do not take the same path yourself. Do not let your own financial uncertainty make you do something rash and foolish. Do not do something dishonest. Do not go the way of the world. Do not worry about yourself. Instead, put your trust in God and ask Him what to do. He knows what to tell you. He's just waiting for you to stop trying to solve things yourself and to start to pay attention to His directions. If you pay attention, you will know when He is pricking your conscience. He will warn you when your heart starts to brew up some form of malice, deceit, theft, envy, evil thoughts, lewdness, adultery, slander, arrogance, murder, or other kinds of folly. When Jesus said, "Watch out," He meant that it could happen to you, especially if you do not even know you're greedy. Here you are, driving to work in your used car. You pass someone's shiny new car. You do not need a new car. Your old car is working fine, and it is paid for. What are you going to say? "Oh, the Lord is going to bless me with a new car." What makes you think that would be a blessing? You don't need any new car. If you get one, you're going to have to go into debt. You call that a blessing? God calls it a debt. The car you already have is good enough. Next time you go somewhere in it, take Jesus' advice. Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. I'll never forget the day I went to visit the late John Templeton, who had a house in the Bahamas, in a beautiful place where the wealthy people live. I walked into his office. He greeted me with a smile and he kissed me. In front of me, I saw an old man in worn-out shorts and tennis shoes with holes all through them. He had on a bush jacket that was ragged because he had worn it so much. Here was one of the wealthiest men in the world, dressed like that. Mr. Templeton of the Templeton Foundation, worth billions of dollars, gave me a tour through his little office. That office was so small, I could hardly find a place to sit as he talked with me. This man was giving away more than $1 million every year to people who had contributed something exceptional to the world's understanding of God. The Templeton Prize had been given to extraordinary individuals such as Mother Teresa, Billy Graham, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Chuck Colson, and Bill Bright. But Mr. Templeton did not appear to fit the part. His clothes were all worn out, and his office was no bigger than the back room of other offices. I thought to myself, if this guy was a Bahamian, he'd be wearing snake leather shoes, an alligator belt, and a tiger shirt. But I think he had his priorities straight. He was so wealthy, partly because he gave away so much. I think he took Jesus' words seriously. Give and it will be given to you. Luke 6:38. Crisis forces development. Too much of the time, by default, people let their greed rule their decisions. They do not think about what they are doing. Down the road, their greedy decisions result in a crisis. In a crisis, not only do other people get hurt, often the greedy ones do too. When things reach the crisis point, there's only one way out, and it has to come through some kind of shift or change. Certainly, you cannot keep on going the way you have been going. Usually, you no longer have the same resources anymore. Times of crisis usually reveal how well or how poorly we have managed our resources. Now, you will be forced to change your ways, hopefully for the better. This is the silver lining of a crisis. Crisis always forces development. It creates the opportunity for creativity. It provides a powerful motivation to change. You have to invent new ways to deal with old problems. If you are a national leader, you have to collaborate with others to develop a new economic system. If you're an ordinary person with ordinary job qualifications, you have to start fresh with some new ideas. You have to push aside your regrets about the past and your instincts to be angry and to blame someone else for the pickle you are in. You have to. In order not only to survive, but to thrive, you must do something new. Here in the Bahamas, with so much of our national economy dependent upon tourism, we have to diversify. That does not mean that somebody else has to diversify. That means a lot of us have to diversify. This economic crisis shakes the foundations of what you thought was traditionally sound. You need to look around you and see what kinds of needs are going unmet. Can you start a business to meet those needs? Our oceans are full of seafood. If somebody from right here in the Bahamas does not start to make better use of all that seafood, some enterprising person from China will soon take advantage of it. This is also true of every other nation. The need to find new ways and develop new products and services is imperative in the midst of crisis. What kinds of resources do you already have? Do you have a car? Do you have a house? Do you have a computer? Think about some way you can not only make a living, but do it in a way that doesn't trample on others. Without being greedy and hard-hearted, you can find a way to do an honest day's work and provide for your family. Once again, without being greedy and hard-hearted, you can find a way to do an honest day's work. You will often hear it said that the words for crisis in Japanese and Chinese are the same as the word opportunity. There's wonderful truth in that. You wouldn't think that those two words have anything in common until you realize that the seeming defeat inherent in every crisis holds the keys to an unanticipated victory. When the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima at the end of World War II, it obliterated the city. Over 100,000 people are estimated to have been killed. The buildings were leveled, the soil was poisoned, but the Japanese people took hold of the hands that reached out to help them, and they worked day and night to rebuild their city and their country. You know what happened. Now they are number one in so many categories, their cars, their electronics, and a lot more. You see, if you think this way, every disaster gets turned in a new direction. Your crisis becomes your best opportunity. If your house burns down, you don't despair. Instead, as soon as you can, you seize this opportunity to build a new and better house. If you get laid off from your job, you either find a better one or you create a better one by going into business for yourself. Out of your crisis comes your opportunity. If you call it an opportunity instead of buckling under the load of the words crisis or tragedy or disaster, then you can start taking advantage of what has happened. you stop thinking of yourself as somebody who lost a job and start thinking of this as the first time you have been set free from a job. Now you can do something new. The rest of the world will continue to wallow in all those results of a crisis: fear, trauma, depression, despair, frustration, anxiety, loneliness, worry, hopelessness, a sense of abandonment, a sense of loss, a sense of death, an urgency for survival, abuse, crime, domestic violence, and substance abuse. But not you, because you are not under the world system. You will rub shoulders all the time with people who are anxious and afraid. You will hear people express how lonely they feel, how they feel as if they are the only ones having such big problems. They'll get more and more desperate, while you and everyone else who does it God's way will be busy stepping up on top of your problems to get a better view. Once you really step up on them, you can see much farther than you could see before. The air is better up there. The Bible says you should be anxious for nothing, but in all things pray, and never stop praying. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Philippians 4:6-7. Instead of worrying, rejoice. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Philippians 4:4. Do not throw away your confidence. He who began a good work in you will finish it. See Philippians 1:6. You do not have to wait for heaven. What you are going through right now is only a test, and I promise you, there is an abundance of life after the test, right here on earth. Wow, thank you so much for following along with the reading of Overcoming Crisis, a book written by Dr. Myles Munroe. Stay tuned for the next chapter. If you have any comments or questions or suggestions, please leave them below. I am always happy to read them and comment along with you. Also, I pray for your family, just as you pray for mine. Thanks for tuning in today to the Dare to Share channel. As always, God bless and have a wonderful day. Bye.